Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a country guide for the country of Marwar, which happens to be my favorite of the Indian nations to play at this point in time. So Marwar is a rather minor country in the scheme of India. They are nominally the largest of the cultural Rajasthani groups. And this is a huge bonus for them because they actually have a reasonably large culture region to unite. So starting out as Marwar, they have one of the best rulers at the beginning of the game. They have a 4-4-6 ruler with a morale of armies. This is very useful. Unfortunately, there is an event that will cause this guy to be assassinated in roughly 16 years. If he survives for 26 years, he'll live out his life, but at the age of 31, it's unusual he will survive, even if he survives the assassination plot. However, he does start with the bonus morale, which helps a lot. Plus, with the military skill, if you just leave military power as is, the odds are you will actually probably be the first person in the world to hit Miltech 4, which is unusual for a non-European country. So I recommend doing that. In terms of playing Marwar, they have another one of the Conquer India trees, and they get some really good ones. If you look at some of these, they have bonus get development in 2 or 3 different capital regions they can pick up. Plus they lower development, which means you can easily develop the institutions, which you should do if at all possible. Also, once you sack Delhi, you can actually weaken Delhi and improve your lands as well. So they have a very solid missions tree. Most of it initially is subdue the area around your start and then expand outwards. But enough about their missions because you'll have to enjoy that yourself. Plus you have to have the DLC. So they are Hindu, so they get to pick among the standard Hindu deities. If you take Shakti over here, the discipline and siege ability is amazing. If you think you can win wars without it, Shiva up here for the reduced aggressive expansion and the core cost is reasonably useful. Usually, though, the discipline is more than worth it. So you start off with negative 20 infantry costs plus 10 infantry combat ability. The infantry combat ability is one of the better starting ideas you can have in the game, and it continues its use pretty much for the entire game. Once you complete the whole tree, you get monthly war exhaustion, which is nice because this is one country that fights a lot of wars if you're going to unite India. The first idea, they get yearly army tradition decay, which is really good. I'll go into why that's great later on, but suffice to say you get better generals. Yearly prestige, not so great. Fort defense, which is rather nice. Development cost, you stack it with some of those missions that I mentioned. This is why I mentioned them first. You can really develop some of these provinces they own really high, relatively cheaply. 15% manpower, which is nice. Land fire damage plus 10, and then discipline plus 5. Essentially, they are one of the stronger, I think they might be the strongest tree in India for pure outright combat, with infantry combat ability, fire, manpower, and discipline. Not to mention army tradition decay. Almost all their bonuses are combat focused. Plus, even this prestige here, everybody always forgets that prestige does in fact enhance one's morale, which makes it very useful. So, you've got a really good king, you've got a solid mission tree, you've got a solid idea tree. Now how to actually play them. So, if you have the Indian expansion, you have unique things for the government. So first off, you'll start in a Rajput kingdom, which will give you yearly army tradition plus 0.5. That combined with your yearly army tradition decay should leave you roughly around 25 to 30 in terms of army tradition without doing anything, just maintaining your forts. Later on, the next stuff they can do is down here in the administrative cadre. This is a very useful one. If you enact the per bias register, it will give all Rajput regiments plus 5 discipline, but it will also allow your army recovery speed and will give more loyalty to your Rajputs, which are essentially your nobility state. Other than that, tree is relatively the same. This is very handy though for a warmongering kingdom. I wish Prussia had that, honestly. Being Hindu, they have this fairly standard national decision tree. They can do religious sects. They can support different movements. I recommend, if you can, support the Advaita movement. The reduced unrest is usually more useful than the stability cost, and the missionary strength will actually allow you to convert some of the Muslims in India back to Hindu if they do convert, but more importantly, it'll allow you to convert this region when you conquer it reasonably early on. So, what makes Marwar unique? Well, other than their start where they actually have rebels, if you put a leader in charge of that, plus with your general, you can usually crush the rebels, stop Marwar from emerging, which is, you have to do it immediately. You'll have other events later on where a couple kingdoms will try and break out of your lands. That's usually easily handled. But the thing that makes Marwar great is their Rajput one. So if you're Hindu, you can have Rajputs on your side. And the big thing Rajputs have is they have better combat stats than one would imagine. So let me just pass over, if I have any free land, to these guys. I don't. Okay, that's fair. So what you can do is, per Rajput army, for 15 loyalty of the Rajput estate, and they gain 5 states, you can raise Rajput regiments, which we have just done. And they are free to raise. They, of course, cost maintenance, but they have 5% morale, which is amazing for early on, but they also have reduced reinforcement cost, and if you drill them, the decay from the drilling goes away slower, which means if you drill, you get the bonus for longer, plus the morale makes them good. What makes them really good, if you remember, there's this reform, which will add an additional 5 discipline, but that comes about where you can do enlist per bias. Let me just, here we go. These guys you raised, it will give plus 10 land fire damage to all Rajput regiments. And then if you have the government reform, it will also give 5 discipline. Now if we remember back here, we have another 5 land fire damage. You start stacking those, and you start to have an army that can pretty much go toe-to-toe with the Prussian army without really any ideas. They have absurd land fire damage, they have reasonable discipline, and they have bonus morale, plus they lose drill slower. It's everything is amazing about this, and this is the best country to do it with. You can do it with any of the Hindus of India, but considering these guys start out with the most lands, they're in the position to take the most advantage of it. The downside is it does fill up your land force, and you can't have more of them than you have provinces. So essentially you want to give all provinces that you aren't really needing, for example, ones that have high manpower but don't have high production or tax. You want to give them to this nobility Rajput states and then raise regiments from them. Also, you cannot get free troops from this regiment, you can of course disband armies that have, army regiments that have no troops in them, and then just pass this Rajput decree and get essentially 10 regiments, or up to 10. This essentially means that if you have no manpower in a war and your army is extraordinarily depleted, you can disband Rajput regiments and then re-raise Rajput regiments, and they'll be full strength again. When I did it, and I did already do the conquest of India as this nation, there's an achievement for that. Not exactly, but there's essentially an achievement for conquering all of India with these guys. It allows you to have a much larger manpower pool than one would expect, and to recover during wars, which is awesome. Plus, you can recruit a general, and this general, we'll recruit him now, has an additional fire, and is usually a really good tradition. So early on, it will allow you to pick up some really solid generals on top of the normal army tradition you have. As you can see, we've already got a level 2 general just at the beginning, combined with the Rajput troops we have. Even without passing that additional, this one for the fire damage, even though I could actually pass this now, because it doesn't actually cost influence, which is important. These regiments will annihilate those rebels, and will annihilate most nations of equivalent army size. You can get some pretty nice stack wipes once you get the next either morale lead, or you get the next infantry unit, the arquebusters. It's really useful. So in terms of expanding as Marwar. So Marwar starts off, as you can see, in a pretty precarious place. You got 60 development. Delhi to your north and Sirhind are much larger. Jaunpur is very large. Gujarat is large. Bahmanis, Vijayanagar, and Bengal and Orissa are all larger than you. So expanding takes slightly of a precarious start. Usually, some of these nations up here will rival you. Delhi, in this case, has rivaled me. Gujarat has rivaled me, and Malwa always seems to rival you in my games. So essentially, you've got rivals on all sides to some degree. Usually you can find some nation, some large nation that actually likes you. Let's see if any of these like me. You can almost get one with Vijayanagar. Usually you can get Delhi once they have the Sirhind rebellion or stuff. You do start out with a vassal, and it is a viable strategy to conquer and vassalize some of these small nations around you who are similar religion and culture. In fact, that's one of the starting things, is you want to try and pick off as many of these small ones as you can. I'm not going to tell you which ones to specifically go for, because of course they will all, their alliance networks will change in all directions. But suffice to say, you have a mission to essentially squash the rebels and then annex your vassal here, Hadati, and that will give you a claims on a lot of areas. You also have, oddly enough, you have a mission to put a fort in Marwar, which is rather unusual, but if you do, it really doesn't help you expand, but it does allow you to maintain your forts cheaper. And this again doesn't help you expand, just combat ability. It's going to take a while for you to pick that one off. But every time you conquer a region, so for example, if you conquer this whole area down here, which you get claims on, you will pick up army tradition, manpower recovery, so you can immediately spin it into another war. Once you conquest Malwa over here, which isn't oddly enough all Malwa's territories, so it's important to realize, you'll get claims on all this area and on and on and on and on. Essentially you end up with claims pretty much to conquer most of India. There is two achievements for Marwar, which I will mention here. You have Maharana Pratap, start as Marwar and field an army of 20 Rajput regiments. That's really easy to do. You should get that maybe by 1480 if you're expanding at latest. It's really easy. And then the other achievement is Marwar Never Changes. Complete the Marwar mission tree. As you can see, the Marwar mission tree involves a fair amount of conquering all the way over here to Bengal. So pretty much you'll have conquered India when you do the achievement. You also have the ability to both form Gujarat, which is your standard one for most of India. You get permanent claims in the air, but you can also unite the Rajputs, which is interesting. You get some development, you get to, empire rank and stuff. I've never particularly found that I wanted to be the Rajput nation. Their ideas, while good, they get morale, military policies, core creation, and other combat stuff. It's really up to you. Converting to Rajput is nice, but I think you actually have to stay as Marwar to get the achievement. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong. But the military strengths are not overwhelmingly greater than Marwar. The biggest loss is you lose development cost, but it's up to you. Suffice to say, it's pretty cool to unite the Rajputs and get an entirely new name. Those are the lands you have to conquer, so you pretty much have to take over most of northwest India, in order to do so. In terms of actual allying people, I advise you ally people like Kutch down here, or any of these. If you can ally Bahmanis, all the better. But try not to ally the tiny nations around you unless you're in desperate need of allies, because you really want to conquer them more than ally them. You need the land, but more importantly, you need the land so you can raise more Rajput regiments, which should be your main focus. In terms of early on expansion, other than following the mission tree, which you can do, I don't recommend it entirely. Gujarat down here tends to get in a fight with Bahmanis. And usually at that point, if you have fabricated claims, you can jump in and seize 2 or 3 of their provinces, at which point this whole area is open to your expansion. The Delhi-Jaunpur War, you're going to need a lot more troops to survive in the conflict between these two regional rivals, or three if Bengal gets involved. You're better off trying to pick off tiny nations up here. Some of these guys you can actually vassalize once you get larger because they're not particular high development, plus same religion and friendly. So that's a legitimate expansion path. I did it a little bit into here. But really you just want the land. In terms of idea groups, this is where I disagree with some people on what to do. Like normal, I usually advocate for defensive ideas, and defensive ideas are a legitimate strategy for them. You get the yearly army tradition and the morale, and you lose less troops to attrition and everything's cheaper, and that will help you a lot as this country. You'll have a very high army tradition. Other people will say you can go innovative because it will give you additional war exhaustion reduction. You'll be able to spread institutions, get tech and all that. Keep it up. Other people say go quantity as these guys. I don't find it particularly useful because your land in terms of development is rather poor. I mean, it's okay development, but it's nothing great. It's a lot of desert and drylands in this region, so you kind of want the reduced attrition in my opinion. But quantity, you want Rajputs, you don't want base units if you can help it. Aristocratic ideas isn't too bad on them because you get another yearly army tradition decay, which is solid. You'll get 2, and then if you take defensive later, you're going to have a ridiculously high base tree. Offensive can be useful. I wouldn't recommend it early on as them. You really can't support a much larger army than you have. And other than that, you want to pick up admin ideas once you start to expand because it'll just make it easier to core. Religious is a thing you may have to do depending on how fast you conquer and how much the Muslims convert India. If they do convert a lot of India, you'll need it. If they don't, you really don't need it. You're reasonably tolerant of them. You could theoretically go humanist. You won't be completely tolerant, but with the religious unity, you won't have a lot of religious problems. You want to avoid expansion exploration. There's no reason to colonize these guys. Trade ideas is useful once you get really large to make more money. Influence, if you're vassalizing people, by all means take it. But reality, you should be conquering them. You're essentially the Indian Prussia. So think about how Prussia really doesn't need too many allies. They're capable of fighting most wars outnumbered. These guys are the same way. Late game, you want to get quality for the tradition, but more importantly, the infantry combat and the discipline. Naval ideas should never enter into your calculations unless for some reason you're trying to invade, I don't know, the Mamelukes or something. I don't know why you'd need it. Diplomatic is okay. The cheaper war score cost is nice, but in some ways I'd almost rather take espionage for the reduced aggressive expansion and the yearly corruption reduction. Your kingdoms, you get 3 diplomats, so you're not hurting for diplomats, and you're not going to have tons of allies. Kind of up to you. Economic, at some point you'll want to take it. The development cost stacks nicely with your 10%, stacks nicely with one of your mission permanent bonuses. You can get like 40 to 50 reduced development cost in provinces. You'll definitely want to pop institutions when they appear. It's actually one of the struggles playing this country over where you want to develop them. I found the best parts to start is right here in Bhilwara. It's owned by the Rajputs, so you may want to revoke it and replace it with yourself, or not replace it with anybody, and instead develop it there just so you get the full benefit from developing it. It's up to you. You're going to have an excess of military points because of your really good king, so you can use it that way. That's why your first idea, of course, should be military, because you'll have an excess of military points for a while. But it's much better to develop it in this province rather than your capital, because even though your capital is, an emporium that you could upgrade, you're still stuck on the hills, and in general, just developing it there is cheaper. Even developing it over here in drylands would be better. Stuff like that. You also have the Jains, and remember that if you get the Jain influence high enough, you can get them getting again decreased development costs from a Jain temple, and you can get some influence and land out of it. So when you can patronize the Jains, you might as well do it. It's not a real problem. They're never going to be a huge political issue for you, but it's free development and cheaper development cost. If you get a Jain province with that, you use that, you stack the other bonuses, you can end up with some really cheap development. It's kind of like developing Japan late game. It's really easy. Your standard stuff with the Brahmins, you know, you can collect tons of admin points, collect a ton of military points from your Rajputs. If you're not fighting wars, make sure they have high influence and take it that way. When you do government reforms, though, I will tell you, you probably don't want to do strength and noble privileges. You probably want to do curtail, even though it reduces the Rajput influence. It makes it a little bit easier to manage it, because as you can see, just from the little I've done, they're looking at what, 35 increased influence, which is already really high. So it's worth trying to reduce their influence at least a little bit, just so you don't risk them taking over. That was my mistake I made when I conquered India. It was I let them have too many influences, and I kept having to take land away from them and give it back, and it was a whole painful stuff. And then you have these guys, which is your standard merchant group. Good for money. Jains are also good for loan money too. So you shouldn't be hurting too much for money. But the key to playing this nation is managing Rajputs. Their warriors are unbelievable. Pretty much no one else in India is going to have them. Most of your major countries you want to conquer are Muslim. The only ones you might run across is some in Vijayanagar and Orissa, which by the time you get to them, you should be able to crush them anyway. The only other thing you got to watch out for is if the Timurids come south without collapsing. If the Timurids collapse, you're golden. If the Timurids don't collapse, you're going to have to rely on a good network of allies and strong troops to win. But it is doable. You can survive an invasion from the Mughals. So essentially, overall, that is Marwar. Definitely one of the more fun nations to play in India. Unfortunately, you're going to lose that really good ruler way too early. It is sad. You're probably going to get a terrible one. You probably want to disinherit this heir here as soon as you get the chance. He's terrible. He won't automatically reappear when the event fires, but if the event does fire, you're going to be stuck with him or letting rebels take over. So get rid of him if you can. You'll probably get a better heir anyway. And essentially that is it for Marwar. If you guys have any questions, comments, or advice for other players, by all means, put them in the comments. If you like this, check out all my other guide videos if you haven't done so. They're in a giant playlist. You can also subscribe, which is very nice, and comment on other videos, all of which is greatly appreciated. So thank you guys all for watching. Hopefully this helps you play Marwar a bit better. And good luck conquering India. Bye for now.